welcome you this evening to the 2016 People's Budget, and we are very happy that you're attending for this very important community activity. At this point, I'd like to introduce Mr. Jeremy Baber, who is the Director of Hartford 2000.
Thank you, Mary. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Hartford 2016 People's Budget. On behalf of the partners, I'd like to welcome all of you. The partners are Hartford 2000, Hartford Public Library, the City of Hartford, Leadership Greater Hartford, Metro Hartford Alliance. We thank you for coming. We're all excited to have you here with us. At the first session of this two-part session, the People's Budget is the can't-miss kickoff event of the City of Hartford's budget season. This program is going to teach us all, Hartford's residents, the neighborhoods, the businesses, and even a few of the city staff that are amongst us about the process and procedures that are behind the 2016 operating budget. Most importantly, the People's Budget is going to show us how we all can be actively engaged and our voices can be heard, so that when the decisions are made about the budget expenditures this year, people will know what we want to have as our choices. And this program will help educate us and guide us and inform us how we can be part of that process and give that input. Tonight is the first part of the People's Budget, and we're going to have the opportunity to hear from Mayor Bronin about his thoughts of the 2016-17 budget. And we're also going to learn from Linda Baer and Melissa McCaw about what's under the hood, and we'll also have a question and answer period that you could ask questions about our budget process. If you guys haven't heard already and your calendars are not marked, March 5th is going to be the second session of the People's Budget, where everybody's going to have the opportunity to get together and work with the actual numbers that are going to be part of the 2016-2017 operating budget. You'll get to split off into small groups, and you're going to get the opportunity to work with each other as if you were council members and the mayor, and try on your own to balance this budget. Before we pass it off, I'd like to give some special thanks. I'd like to thank Oz Griegel and Julio Concepcion, as well as Julie Mahan of Metro Hartford Alliance for helping us out with the refreshments and also doing some promotion for this event. I'd also like to thank the City of Hartford, Jeff Heyman, David Beck, and Stephanie Ivers for helping put together this program, and also the Program Support Program. Leadership Greater Hartford, Andre Santiago, helping out with the facilitators. Hartford Public Access Television, who is so kindly on short notice come out to be able to film this event for us. We'll get this out there on the web so that everybody who wasn't able to make it tonight because of the weather will be able to see it at their leisure and at their convenience. And then most importantly, I'd like to thank two very important people that make this event possible. Since I started working as Hartford 2000's Executive Director, it's only been about a month and a half, almost 2 months now, these people have really shown themselves to be exceptional in terms of what they provide to our organization, but also to the City of Hartford. And they make this event possible as well as many other events. Linda Baer with the City of Hartford and Richard Frieder with Hartford Public Library volunteer their time, their own personal time, to really make so many of these events happen. And an event such as this that has been taking place since 2002, nearly 14 years now, is quite exceptional. And their work and their dedication has also provided us with other such programs that I'm sure you guys are very familiar with. The current initiative that's out there, which is the Hartford Decides initiative, where the people are going to decide how to spend $1.25 next year's $1.25 million allocated to next year's CIP budget. It's a great program. Information is out on the table about it if you haven't heard about it already, but it's excellent, and soon all of us will be able to vote on the proposed ideas. And last but not least, I'd like to thank our elected officials, members of City Council, Mayor Bronin. In 2015, the people of the City of Hartford made a decision, and we chose to have significant change And we know that the job that you face currently is not an easy one, but we have our faith in you, we put our faith in you, and we know that you all will make the right decisions for this next year's budget, and wish you the best of luck. Thank you very much, and I'd like to pass off the mic to Linda Bayer, and she will guide us through the rest of the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you for the compliments as well. Those were unexpected, but of course, always appreciated. Just want to set the scene a little bit before the mayor speaks to you. As was just mentioned, Hartford 2000 has been off and on doing the people's budget since 2002, when we got together in the South Congregational Church, I think it was, and pencils and papers, and we tried to balance the city budget. Because generally speaking, you start preparing a city budget with a gap between revenues and expenditures. Revenues, unfortunately, are usually less than the expenditures you expect to make to keep the current level of services. So the purpose of our two-part workshop here is, first of all, education, so that you who may not be familiar with how a city budget is put together or what the issues might be can learn about them, and we'll get excellent information from management and budget tonight on the nuts and bolts. But it's also to prepare you for the March 5th Saturday session, which is a hands-on exercise where, as Jeremy said, you pretend you're the city council and you try to balance the budget. And in part, you find that this is not an easy thing to do because you have to decrease expenditures or increase the tax rate or make choices that are not pleasant for anyone. But it's hard to do that, especially if you don't have sufficient information. So we look at this session as a way for you to understand where the city is currently in its financial situation, what the process is for moving from where we are today to having a budget adopted by the end of May. And if you check your program, you'll see a schedule of the high points, if you will, of the budget process. You'll also see some information about the public hearing that the city always holds, so you can put that on your calendar as well as next Saturday. But next Saturday, you'll be able to work on balancing the budget by determining in a group what your priorities are, what programs and services are the most important to you as a small group. You'll be asked to consider what level of taxes you think that you and your other residents can pay. And you'll have a computer program to help you do that. As I say, in 2002, we had pencils and papers and calculators, and now we have software that the budget office has been working on with software developer. We were the first to use it last year. So it won't be as technically difficult. You'll have help with that, but the hard part is deciding what to do. And the first thing that you all want to know is, what is the situation with the city currently? And I think you want to know, what is the mayor's vision for how to proceed through a very difficult undertaking? So it's my very great pleasure to introduce Mayor Luke Bronin.
Thank you, Linda, and thanks to Jeremy, and thank you to everybody who came out on this cold and snowy night. This is the beginning of a really important process. It's a chance to have an open, transparent conversation about the budget, about how it gets put together, about the challenges we face, about the choices that we make, and to ask you to be a part of that decision, a part of that process as residents of the city. So please encourage your friends, encourage your neighbors to be part of this process too. What I want to do before I turn this over to my budget director, Melissa McCaw, is just talk in broad strokes about where we are this year and where we are looking out over the next few years and about what's at stake in this budget. Melissa will get into the details of the revenue lines and the expenditure lines, but I want to start by saying the city of Hartford faces a full-blown budget crisis. It's been years in the making. For year after year, we've seen a dramatic gap between revenues and expenditures, but that gap has been hidden in the past with one-time revenues, things like selling off parking garages, raiding long-term reserves, selling debt or issuing debt at less favorable rates and getting some extra premium for it. As a result, we find ourselves with a structural problem that we can't hide anymore. And we have an obligation as a city to put ourselves on a sound, long-term, sustainable footing. Ultimately, the only way we really make this city great again is to start growing again, to start bringing in businesses, to start turning our blighted property into productive tax-paying property, to start seeing companies invest in Hartford rather than move their operations elsewhere. If we're going to get to that place, we have to be a city that tackles our challenges head on. Because anybody who's thinking about making a commitment to our city is going to look at our budget and they're going to know that right now we are not on a sustainable path. This year, we've got a gap of $9 million. I mean, in this current year ending in June. That means the budget that was passed last year wasn't really balanced. It might have looked balanced, but it wasn't really balanced. Next year, the budget we're putting together is a $32 million shortfall, $32 million gap. Let me just put that in context. Our entire non-education spending is less than $250 million. So we're talking about 10% of everything we spend other than education. And we can't and we shouldn't spend any less on education. So we need to find at least more than 10% of our total operating dollars. We need to figure out a way to close that gap, whether through cost savings or revenue. If we don't make structural changes, if we don't make fundamental changes to our structure of government, the next year, that deficit grows to $48 million. The year after that, it grows to $63 million. And the year after that, it grows to $67 million. That's why we can't address this problem the way it's been done in the past, by simply figuring out how to piece things together to get through this year. If we do that, we're just going to be back here facing an even bigger problem every single year from here on out. There are two sides of the ledger. There's revenues and there's expenditures. But I think we need to start this conversation acknowledging that the city of Hartford already has the highest mill rate in the state of Connecticut. For residents, it's a little bit less because we have a complicated structure where residential property gets assessed at a lower percentage of its value than commercial. But for our small businesses especially, they're paying twice or more than twice what they could pay in any surrounding town. So as we talk about what we have to do to get our city to a growing place where we can grow out of these fiscal challenges, we have to keep in mind that anything we do on the tax side could strangle the city, could cause us to see more businesses leave, could cause us to see employment decline and property taxes decline. So we have to be very, very careful not to solve a short-term problem by creating an even worse longer-term problem. On the cost side, we are pretty lean government already. As you may know, our police force is about 100 officers below where it was a few years ago, 100 below where it ought to be, according to some independent studies. Our Department of Public Works is the lowest it's been in many, many years. That's true throughout city government. So the cuts are going to be very, very difficult to find. What we need to do as a city is come together with all of our stakeholders. I'm going to be sitting down with all of our labor leaders, with our unions, and having an honest conversation saying, how do we work together to make sure that we can put this city on the path to fiscal health, so that the commitments that have been made to you are real commitments, so that they're not promises that are built on a weak foundation, but they're real. We're going to have everything on the table. It's going to be very, very difficult. It's going to be very painful. There's no way out of this challenge that we face without making tough, painful choices. But what's at stake right now, in this year, I think, is whether we're going to become a city that is once again growing and healthy and vibrant and truly the economic engine of the center of this state, or whether we're going to accept a Hartford in decline. And I don't think we can accept or ever should accept a Hartford in decline. So that means this is the year to make the tough choices. This is the year to do the painful things so that years from now, hopefully not too many years from now, we can be coming back to this room, not talking about how we close a deficit, but how we make the investments we need to make in our city, in the arts, in education, in recreation, in job training, in being a true second chance society, in youth employment. Those are the investments we want to make. And to do that, we've got to make the tough choices this year. So thank you very much. I already talked longer than I meant to. It really is a pleasure to see you here tonight. I hope you will continue to reach out and get more people involved. And now it's my pleasure to turn this over to my budget director, Melissa McCaw, who I think you will find is a tremendous asset to the city of Hartford. So thank you very, very much, and have a good evening. I'm sorry that I need to run out. I'm going to, one of the partners in putting this together is Leadership Greater Hartford, but maybe in an example of bad planning, they're having another event just up the road, and I had committed to stop by there and talk with them a little bit. So I'm going to leave to do that. I may try to come back later, but thank you all for being here tonight and really value your participation in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Bronin, for sharing the perspective of the challenge that we're currently facing. I think what is delightful about our leader is the passion that he shares in the vision for the great city of Hartford. I, too, am delighted to be a part of this team. And so at that, I will take you on a journey through the city of Hartford's budget for 16 and 17. To give you a little bit of perspective about the timeline, we're kicking off our People's Budget Information Session tonight. You will have an opportunity on March 5th to do a practical hands-on adjusting of levers in terms of what you think would be the best options for balancing our city budget. We have less than 2 months to submit a budget to the council that is due on April 18th. On April 27th, we will begin our public hearing process. That's another opportunity for you to have a voice, for your voice to be heard as well. And department hearings will begin in April and May. We must adopt a budget no later than May 31st. So we certainly have our challenges cut out for us, but we are embracing them. So let's talk a little bit about our budget. If you were to look at the fiscal 16 revenue budget, you will see that we have a $533.8 million revenue budget. You will notice that 45.75%, 244 million under intergovernmental revenue. That's pretty much our state revenues that flow from the state of Connecticut. That would be payments in lieu of taxes. It's our education cost sharing, the monies that go to the Board of Ed. It's a direct pass-through. That's almost 46% of our budget. The second largest category is down here under general property taxes. That would be our real estate, our residential and commercial, so business taxes, personal property, and motor vehicle. So if you just take a glance at this, you can see that 95% of our general fund budget is coming from two sources. As we begin to think about the changes in revenues from 16 to 17, you'll see here for intergovernmental revenues, we anticipate $27 million in new revenues. This is primarily due to the proposed revenues in the governor's budget. Two of the major components would be a $12.4 million sharing of sales tax revenues. This proposal that the governor has put forward is essentially to benefit urban municipalities with a large percentage of tax-exempt property. So our state-owned, our hospitals, our higher ed institutions that currently are tax-exempt, the state of Connecticut is proposing a revenue-sharing arrangement, and that would be about $12.4 million of the $27 million you see there. In addition, there is about $14.5 million that is due to a new state car tax. that is directly related to this $7.4 million. So as part of this proposal, the state will have us move to a uniform mill rate. So instead of charging 74.29 mils, we would be charging 32 mils. So that's the reason why our general property taxes would go down by 7.4, but we have a pickup of $14 million in intergovernmental revenues. At the end of the day, it is still net favorable. The other major changes from 16 to 17, you'll see under here under other financing sources. This is primarily due to the Metropolitan District Company. We had a lot of repairs and maintenance that was occurring in fiscal year 16, and as a part of that arrangement, they utilized our Hartford police officers for private duty jobs. That was a revenue that came in to the city. And the repairs are coming to an end in 17, so we'll see a reduction of revenue of about $2.4 million. The other large change that you notice here is under other revenues, and this is primarily sale of city property that we are somewhat right-sizing our expectations for fiscal 17. So overall, you'll see that revenues are anticipated to grow from 533.8 to 548.9 million. It's about 15 million in growth. This is still very preliminary at this point, but we anticipate about 15 million. So what does this mean if you were a residential homeowner here in the city? If you had a house that was valued at $125,000, we have an assessment ratio of 30.68%, you'll see here. So that means that we will only tax you on $38,000 of that $125,000 house that you own. Based on $38,000, our mill rate is 74.29. You would pay $28.49 in taxes for that home in the city of Hartford. When you compare us to New Haven and Bridgeport, who do not have this preferential assessment ratio, their assessment ratio is at 70%. For the same house that's valued at $125,000, the tax value would be $87,500 respectively. And in New Haven, based on the mill rate of 41.55 and Bridgeport of 42.2, you would pay $3,600 approximately in both of these towns. So the mill rate in this particular case can be deceiving in that we have a preferential advantage to living here in the city of Hartford. If we were to compare that to a small business here in the city, and say their business is valued at around $250,000, the assessment ratio is 70%. Our mill rate is 74.29 as compared to these two peer municipalities. 70% of the 250 is 175,000. So as a small business here in the city of Hartford, that business would be subject to taxes of $30,000 as compared to New Haven and Bridgeport. It's almost double. So it's very important, as the mayor indicated, to recognize that we have somewhat of a disincentive to new growth of businesses here in the city. And that is why the mill rate is very important. We need to make sure we're taking into consideration the impact. We want to have economic growth. We want businesses to come in. We do not want to send them away. When you're looking at our expenditure budget, we have a $533.8 million budget. The first thing I would draw your attention to is 53% is for education. By state law, there's a minimum budget requirement. We cannot reduce this amount, nor do we want to. We want to ensure we're investing in our little ones, which are our future, and they are our present. So that's something that 53% off the cuff goes to education. If you're to look at the other major components, you would see that public safety is 13.89%. You would see that our benefits and insurances, somewhat fixed costs, 12.3%. When you look at non-operating expenditures, a large component in here is utilities. It's 24 million. If we were to remove the education, it gives a better picture of what the city's essentially left with. And so here you can see that public safety is 30% of our general fund budget. Debt service, 9%. Benefits and insurance, 26%, and we know that utilities is a good component of this 14%. So my point is that almost 70% of our non-education budget is in safety, fixed cost of debt service, fixed cost of utilities, and relatively fixed cost of benefits and insurance. It helps to paint the challenge that we have ahead of us. The mayor mentioned that our current preliminary gap for fiscal 17 is $32 million. Let's talk about some of the major changes from 16 to 17. In benefits, you will see that the 16 budget was $13.4 million and is projected to grow to $35 million. This is one of the areas where we used one-time fund balances to support our current costs. So in fiscal year 16, there's about $13 million of rating a fund balance to meet our expenditures for the year. In addition, there are savings of items like switching to new carriers and deficit mitigation savings that are built in. And we have to recognize the real cost of services for fiscal 17. That's a $21 million of this almost $32 million gap. When we look at payroll and overtime, of this $16 million in increased expense, $10 million is in overtime. Part of this is due to setting the overtime budget at unrealistic levels. So for example, if you have a trend of what it takes to run a department, and that trend has been consistent, then you would want to budget at that level. Some of the structural adjustments were one-time savings that did not materialize per se in overtime. Debt service, we restructured our debt. We're feeling the impact of that in the out years. We were able to take the savings much earlier on, and now our debt service is growing by $5.3 million from 16 to 17. MHIS, Metro Hartford Information Services, that's our IT group. This $500,000 increase, again, is another example of where we used one-time fund balance to support current operations. As we look to the out years, you can see that the $32 million is fiscal year 17. As we move to fiscal year 18, we have expenses. We have debt service obligations that we have to meet. Health care costs are going to go up. That gap will grow to $48 million. So our challenge ahead of us for fiscal 16 is only the beginning. We still will have an additional 16.8 in fiscal 18, almost $15 million in 19, and $3.8 million in fiscal 20. The challenge ahead of us is long-term, and that's the reason why it really needs to be structural. To give some perspective to these budget gaps, a gap of almost $31.6 million would equate to a 9.25 mill rate increase. So it would take our 74.29 to 83.54. This is not the direction we want to go in. So I share this with you and the details of it because transparency is very important. And the purpose of this informational session is to give you the information to help us make these very tough decisions. And as you can see, the easy choices are gone. You know, 10% reductions across the board are not going to achieve a $32 million gap. We have to make tough choices about what kinds of services we're going to deliver, how we're going to deliver them, right-sizing our departments, cost efficiencies. The cuts that we have to make are deep and they are painful. But with that said, tonight's goal is to share this information with you so that on March 5th, you can come back and give us your thoughts and your voice as to where you would like to see changes made in our general fund budget. On March 5th, you'll have the opportunity to hands-on work with our Balancing Act tool, and we'll also be available to answer your questions. So I think that's the 50,000-foot perspective of where we are and what the outlook looks like. And at this point, I'd like to just open it up for questions and answers.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay.
Hold on. Logan, hang on one second. You need the microphone.
Thank you, Linda. All right, so first question is could you, I mean, this is the first time I think I've ever heard the term assessment ratio. So could you maybe just talk about like what is that? How does it work? Who sets that?
I'm actually going to ask our assessor if he would join me. This is his area of expertise, and I don't think I would do it justice. So, John, if you would be so kind.
My name's John Phillip. I'm the city assessor. The assessment ratio in every state in every city and town in the state for all types of property is 70% of the assessed value. The assessed value on real estate is updated every 5 years in revaluation. We're doing that next year, and the assessed value of motor vehicles and business personal property is updated every year. In Hartford, Hartford is the only municipality that deviates from that, and we have, for going back to 1990, the city, with the legislature's help, has tried to shield residential real estate from the effects of revaluation in a number of different ways. And the way we're doing it now, after 3 changes in the law over time, is there's a lower assessment ratio applied to residential real estate. And residential real estate is 1, 2, and 3 family houses and residential condominiums. It is calculated annually. It's a calculation that I am tasked with by statute. It is, the ratio cannot go down. There are 5 possible outcomes. It can stay the same, rise 1.5%, 2.5%, 3.5%, or 5%. And the calculation is based upon the change of CPI compared to the change in the amount that we raise annually in the budget locally. I think that's about it on the assessment ratio.
Logan did that.
I mean, yeah, that was helpful. I guess maybe just a baseline question is why, so if all these other municipalities, if they are going by the same rules and they can only change a certain amount of percent every year, how is there such a huge difference? You know, but how did we, and maybe it's just a different philosophical approach, but I mean, 70% and 30% just seem completely different. So I'm just wondering, like, when did that start and how did we get there?
In 1990, the 1989 revaluation was brutal. There were literally thousands of lawsuits. Residential values rose by a factor of about 4, and commercial values rose by a factor of less than 3. So that shift was a huge tax increase to the residential property unless something were done to mitigate that. So at the time, the choice was something they called a surcharge, and it was an additional mill rate levy against commercial property. And it was supposed to hold the effective tax rate on houses at 1.5%. It was very complicated, and the surcharge was universally reviled over time. In the run up to the 2006, so also at that time we were doing revaluations every 10 years. Before 1989, the last one was done in 1978. So there was just this huge shift in value. In 1999, we used the same methodology. There was no change in the law. That was the next revaluation. That was the revaluation where big negative changes in the grand list began happening. That was right after the office market crash in the early 90s. That didn't take effect in the grand list until the 1999 revaluation. In 2006, which was the next scheduled revaluation, the law changed requiring, well, the law changed a few times, but now it's every 5 years, and the next one after 99 became 2006. That's where we basically chose to eliminate the surcharge over time and at the same time protect the houses by a lower residential ratio. After the 2006 revaluation was complete and the effects were known, and the effects were, what happened then was the office market, the big downtown towers were, their values didn't change much, so they weren't going to see a big jump in taxes. The houses were protected by the lower ratio. And what ended up happening was the smaller commercial property and the mixed-use property got hammered. And so the city chose to phase in the changes in the assessment over a 5-year period. What that did was, instead of the list going up all at once and that ratio going down once to compensate, the list grew a little bit each year, and the ratio was pushed down with each incremental rise in value. So at the end of the 2006 revaluation cycle, our ratio had been forced down to like 26%, 26.2 or whatever, I forget the exact number. In 2011, the surcharge was gone, the law changed again, and now that's when the 5 possible outcomes came into play, and now it's going up very slowly over time.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Other questions? Comments?
I just don't want to. Okay, so I understand nationally we have a lot of debt. So maybe also historically, I hear, we have a 9 million deficit. How typical is it for a municipality to have some sort of deficit coming into this point? Just because I hear the narrative that this is very concerning, but I don't know if just in people that are budgeting and if this is just kind of, oh yeah, this happens every year, or if this, what makes this 9 million particularly startling, I guess? And I also get the larger narrative that structurally we can't keep doing these one-time fixes. So maybe my follow-up question is, what was some of the reasoning behind some of those one-time fixes? Because, you guys are super smart people. I know that you guys were, there's logic, there's reasoning behind why you guys were doing what you were doing. So I guess those are kind of my 2 questions. How typical is it to have some sort of deficit at this point in the year? And 2, what was some of the reasoning behind some of those one-time expenditures?
So to answer your question, I can say yes, we are doing that now. I'm not sure what happened in the past, but it's a great point, and yes, we're on it.
I think I have 2 questions. So the first one, I think we keep hearing, this idea that, now is the time to make the tough decisions and now is the time to do some new things, right? And I know that we're going to, in the second part of this workshop, we're going to actually get the opportunity to see what that looks like. But from your end, what do those tough decisions look like, I guess, where you're coming from? So I feel like there has to be some idea of what those tough decisions will be. And as you said, when you're looking at, other cities and kind of the ways in which they've weathered the storm, kind of what is the vision that because I get that the point of this is kind of to get our feedback, but my thought is that you would have some sort of vision on your own. So what does that actually look like? Because it just sounds like tough decisions, but what does that look like?
So, as the mayor said, everything is on the table. So we're looking at things from, when we compare ourselves to peers, what does the back office or finance administrative function look like? What's the size of that for a given city? We're looking at things from the perspective of health. What have other municipalities done in terms of health? We're looking at when is the last time we might have rebid out insurance? We're looking at service delivery. Are there different ways of delivering services that are more economical? When you look at other municipalities that made these tough decisions, which services did they prioritize high? Which services did they prioritize low? So in terms of the size of our department, to how we deliver services, to what services we deliver, to what we offer our employees, everything is on the table. I don't want you to get me wrong. We do have options, and we do have a list of things we're analyzing and vetting, and not only looking at the quantitative or the numbers aspect of it, but the qualitative and how that impacts the people who receive those services. That's currently underway. That has to be done within 2 months. There are some department heads that are here, and they have an ambitious deadline of March 18th to put forward ideas. We're meeting in the evenings, we're meeting on Saturdays, and we're having the tough conversations. And we're looking at it and saying, well, what does this come to? It's not deep enough. What else can we do? So I hope that gives you a little bit of a sense of what's on the table. We do have ideas. We're We're trying to hit it honestly from every angle.
My question is, excuse me, the process for next week, because a lot of what you said, you base it a lot on what has sort of previously happened. And for example, to make cuts, you say you should look at the levels what they were to make sure that they're realistic. And so with the process that we have next week, will there be, I guess, supporting information provided so that the decisions that we do make as far as cuts aren't sort of personal decisions, whereas I think this is important, I think that's important, but it's actually of substance to say, well, they've tried this, and so we can cut this and try this new method and just have it be more of substance. For example, like with utilities, you mentioned utilities. Will we know whether the city has taken steps to sort of make things more energy efficient, for example? So those types of sort of background information to, again, just help educate us on what has already been tried so that the suggestions that we're making actually, again, is of substance.
So our goal is to make sure that you have the personnel from the city of Hartford that can answer those types of questions. In terms of the energy, I can tell you we have implemented a lot of energy cost savings initiatives. There are some more opportunities that we could maximize. Some of them, for example, might require some capital dollars that would save on the general fund side of life. But if you have specific questions that you think would be helpful in terms of the recommendations you'd put forth next Saturday, then you can definitely reach out, and we'd be happy to give you any appropriate information you need. But we will be on site to answer any questions that you might have. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So I don't know if it's really a question, but I just want to clarify that I understand. I'm going to explain it to you, and you just tell me if I'm off base,
No problem.
right? Okay. So, because this is this is not my thing.
That's okay.
So, we're talking about this sort of idea of this sort of mill rate, right? And so what I'm getting from that is that, it's relatively cheap to live in Hartford, but really expensive to own in Hartford, I guess. So is it that as the gap is growing, that then forces the mill rate to increase, and then that then even just totally just even makes it worse off for the folks that are kind of the small business owners, correct? Okay, there's that. So, So I guess how do we because we're saying one of the solutions or one of the things we need to do is, bring in businesses, is allow, companies and folks to invest. And I don't know if there's a difference between the kinds of companies that we want to bring in, because if we're talking about sort of folks that are actually bring in some money, small businesses, I don't know if that's a thing. But so that being sort of a big thing about, growing Hartford. So how are we able, I guess, to move that forward with this whole mill rate situation? You know what I'm saying?
So first, I just want to clarify one thing on the mill rate. You were mostly right on. Okay. This is if you owned a home in Hartford, right? And this is, yes, you get an advantage because you're kind of getting a discount in a sense, right? Compared to our peers, we have a higher mill rate, but because only 30% of your property, you're making out. So that part, just a clarification, and you're right about this. The impact to the small business, it's not favorable. They don't get an advantage to being here in the city, and when you compare it to our neighboring large urban municipalities, it's cheaper for them to do business there. So that's the first part of your question. The second part of your question is, in light of that, we're very sensitive to adjusting the mill rate because we don't want to send businesses away. So how do we understand that we got to make cuts, we want to bring people in? It's a great question. Some of the things that we currently do in development services, and I'll speak to it very lightly, I would refer you to talk to that department because they know it in far more detail, is that we do have opportunities to help them. For example, we might own land and they might want to have a business on that land, and we might have like a relationship where in exchange for that, you kind of pay us back in a sense, in lack of better terms, so it would bring revenue in. So it helps them, so they don't have to buy the land in a sense. They can start their business, and later on we'll have a long-term agreement to bring revenue back in. So those are some of the things that Development Services offers. They can speak far more intelligently to it. One of the mayor's other initiatives is in regards to blight. Businesses want to come in, they want a clean municipality. You know, they don't want to see abandoned properties with garbage all over the place and that sort of thing. So one of his initiatives that you've heard him talk about is how our city looks. We have our Director of Public Works here. This is something she prides herself in. You should hear her in leadership meetings. I mean, she preaches this. And so that's another component. We have resources that we have within our budget. Like we have the Living Sustainable Neighborhoods Initiative that they drive around and they find properties that are not in good condition. We clean up properties. And so there is a team currently that's looking at all of our different blight initiatives across the city and making sure that all of the resources are most effective. So I do think that we have some things we're currently doing that help to attract and draw. But it is an excellent question. It is an excellent question.
Okay, I'm just one follow-up.
Absolutely.
And that's, I guess, sort of what I'm getting at in my head. Like, so I do know, you've heard the saying, like, in order to make money, you got to spend money or something like that. So like long-term actually investment. So, does it make sense to, put money into bringing in, because as we're talking about cuts, I don't know that it's smart to cut everything. Like, I feel like, there's, right. So if we're putting, so I guess, in your opinion, what are the things to really invest in or that are actually smart to put the money towards that you kind of see like long-term sort of it actually sort of being a payback to the city? So yeah, what are those specific things, and I guess how do you see it kind of working back to pay that back as we're like, preparing for this exercise next week?
Well, I would say that as a general rule of thumb, across-the-board cuts are typically not recommended. In that it's important to be strategic about where you make changes. So within Development Services, for example, maybe the planning function is not an area you want to hit. If it's going to be counterproductive, then that's an area that you might want to have off the table. So again, it's not, I don't think we should go at it as making across-the-board cuts. I think we need to measure the kind of like a cost-benefit analysis of this $200,000 in savings is going to generate what? Is it going to reduce economic activity? Then no, that's probably not something we want to consider. And those are the types of conversations that are happening between now and April 18th. And I think the part that should be most relieving to you is that we are not taking a short-sighted view for the options that are on the table. So we would take just what you're expressing into consideration, and that would likely be an area we would not want to target.
Most def. But I think, but I think I'm specifically interested in that. I understand that I was kind of articulating that's what I'm thinking you guys are doing, right? So if we're looking at sort of the long-term vision, what specifically are, I don't know if you can answer this, but what specifically are the kinds of things that we would want to actually put money, effort, energy toward in order to get this growth Hartford situation going?
I would really defer at this time. I know the mayor has an economic development plan, but I think you'll have more opportunities to engage him on that type of conversation, because I think that the vision starts at the top. And so I think that's a question that's excellent for you to address the next time you have an opportunity.
Cool beans.
All right, excellent.
Melissa, if I may.
Yes, ma'am.
You didn't actually ask this question, but when you were referring to owner-occupied housing, which is the group that gets the discount, if you will, I wondered if John might just address the apartment housing, the larger buildings with many units, and do they fall into the small business category, or how are they treated in terms of taxing?
Next year, 4 units and more will be assessed just like everything else, except residential real estate. And for the residential real estate, that protection is not merely for owner-occupied houses. It's just, if it's a 3-family or less, it gets the break. Apartments, historically, apartments were afforded the same protection that houses were, and in the run-up to the 2011 revaluation, I guess for whatever reason, they were decided to be removed from that protected status over a 5-year phase-in period.
So people who own apartments are charging rents that take into account the amount of taxes they pay, as well as other expenses.
If they can.
If they can, if the
Yep.
market will bear it.
Right.
I'll ask a question. It's sort of a, and I know you can't respond to it, but part of our problem is the state, the tax laws are for the state. We're locked into property taxes. It doesn't give us options to do other things. And then our pilot money, we don't get full amounts of that. That won't change between now and the end of May 31st, but it just seems to me that we need to be putting more pressure on the state. We really are. It's like at this point we're like a dog chasing a tail. We don't have any other options. And there might be options if we were able to do things like add a sales tax to hotels or things like that. That might help us out, and we can't do that. And so what strategy do we have for that, or do we have a strategy?
It's a good one. I would say that the state has made an effort to, this year in the governor's proposed budget, to really help urban municipalities with, in our case, 50% tax exempt. So we are picking up $12 million in new revenues. There are winners and there are losers for that, because there are municipalities that are experiencing revenue decreases. So in 17, we are making out favorably with what the governor has proposed. I believe that the ongoing dialogues are occurring to just make sure that our leadership at the state level understand the impact of, the impact of the pilots and not at the full value. Continuing to make sure we just had in here, I don't know if he's here now, but Devon Ward is our Director of Intergovernmental Policy. He's advocating for us at the Connecticut State Legislature and ensuring that the mayor's legislative agenda is heard. So we are continuing to explore all fronts in terms of maximizing growth, revenue growth from the state of Connecticut. We've looked at other municipalities that have done voluntary pilot programs. There are some options we can consider, but certainly I would say that we would be $12 million. We would be at $44 million had the governor not recommended a $12 million revenue sharing through the sales tax. So we're in better shape. It would be worse.
I wanted to talk about the baseball field and when is that supposed to be finished, and what are you trying? What kind of companies are you trying to attract that would help build Hartford? Like a lot of the large companies are moving out because the taxes are lower. So what is it that you're trying to do with the baseball field that would make companies want to come instead of leaving?
I have to apologize. I can't speak to the stadium arrangement. I know the mayor has held some public hearings and might have some other opportunities for you to ask questions about it, but it's not necessarily in my area of expertise. And 4 weeks in, I would not want to misspeak on that topic, so I apologize.
All right.
Okay.
Hi. Is that ratio and mill rate, does that also apply to big businesses? I'm assuming that small businesses is like local mom and pop, Hartford developed, versus big businesses, which would be like Walmarts, that kind of thing. Is there a different ratio and mill rate?
No. 70% for commercial.
Commercial, okay.
Yep, businesses, correct? Yes, thank you.
Anyone else? Oh, sure.
Good evening, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm the city tax collector, so I can't come to these and not say hello, and thank you all very much for coming, and to Melissa and her team. You know, I have been involved in the budget process. This is my 8th year with the city of Hartford, so I've got some perspective on it, and you know, I can only tell you as a taxpayer in Hartford and as your tax collector that we've come a long way. And what we're hearing tonight is quite a bit different than what we've heard in the past. We really are, I think, going to be able to stay away from one-time sources of revenue. A comment was made earlier that I just want to touch on, and that is, you know, we're very much creatures of the state of Connecticut. So I just want to share with you that there are a couple of bills up at the state that are particularly focusing on the need to bring businesses to Hartford. And I'm not an expert on this, but I'll tell you that the ideas focus on things like a $10,000 threshold below which you would not pay personal property taxes. I think that's a bill that's up for consideration. There's also some innovative ones that have been floated for the last couple of years where a new business would be phased in as opposed to being taxed at the full rate. But my point is that those types of things are not up to the city of Hartford. They're up to the state of Connecticut. And so one of the things I'm most encouraged about is that Mayor Bronin is going to be working very hard with our delegation to get some real positive changes from the state. It's not just what they give us in terms of ECS money, it's what they can do for us on the legislative piece as well. And just one other example, you know, we're owed millions and millions of dollars in back motor vehicle taxes that we have not collected. And I have been advocating for 5 years that the state needs to give us some settlement authority. So if you can imagine somebody who owes the city of Hartford several $1,000s from years ago, they don't even live in Hartford. Under current law, we can't settle for less. Even the IRS can settle for less. Other state governments can settle for less. But when a taxpayer calls me up and they say, you know, I went to Yukon 10 years ago and my car tax was $300 and now it's $3,000, we can't settle for less. Things like that. So there are a lot of things that the state of Connecticut can do that would really be helpful. And so I encourage you, when you're here at the next session talking about what we can really do to balance the budget, pay particular attention to what other help we can get from the state, not just in terms of cash. Thanks very much.
Another question?
Okay, and just one last thing to clarify. So you did specify that, you know, with the gaps that we're going to see, I don't actually even live in Hartford. The gaps that we're going to see, that the commercial mill rate is going to increase. That would also be true for residential properties as well, correct?
Oh, I didn't say that.
No.
I didn't say definitively that the mill rate was going to increase.
Okay.
I wanted to let me make that
Cool.
very clear.
Write that down.
Might want to repeat that, Melissa.
I did not state that the mill rate would increase.
That's a potential?
I did not state that. It was just to demonstrate for you, am I going in the right direction? It was just to demonstrate for you the impact of trying to solve a gap like this, what that would do to the mill rate, and to reiterate the impact that would have on, you know, we want to accelerate the economic engine of this city. So that's was really the message there, is to just help you to understand the impact. So
is this pretty much like, just in layman's terms, like this is why increasing taxes is not the move? Or, because I guess is that kind of the purpose behind like the scenario? Like, because I feel like that's what everybody says, just raise taxes, and you're like, that doesn't fit with the vision. Is that kind of where this is coming from? Or just
solving a $32 million gap would require a significant increase in the mill rate, and a 9.25 mill rate increase is very difficult to fathom. What I will say to you is that the city of Hartford is not unique from nonprofit organizations that are all struggling with kind of redefining their model of how they operate. We're not alone. Nonprofits, privates, publics, they've all had to think about how to operate differently to live within their available resources. And I think that's really the spirit of this message, is that it's now time for us to make the tough decisions. Yes, we've used one-time revenue, one-time fund balances and various adjustments to the budget to try to make it work. But it's now time to make the tough decisions, and we're not alone. Other municipalities have done this, and that's what we intend to do. We intend to dig deep, dig down, and start inventing ourselves in how we deliver services. Are we efficient? What size should we be? We have to really start making those tough choices, and that's the vision of our mayor. That's what we seek to do, and tonight is just a kind of launch to get your feedback. That's the message I want you to walk away with, is that one time stop, let's start getting strategic. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. And I think, Jeremy, you have some last words for us? But perhaps we need to give Melissa a round of applause.
Thank you very much, Melissa McCaw. Everybody, thank you so much for coming tonight. It wasn't the best circumstances for you to be out on the roads, and I really appreciate you being here. Thanks to Hartford Public Access again. Those that couldn't join us, we're going to try to get this up and posted to the Hartford Public Access website as soon as we can. We'll get links to that so that you should be able to view it from the Hartford 2000 website. PowerPoint copies are available at the back desk of the presentation that was offered, so if you'd like to take those home with you, please do so. And I would ask that you please fill out a feedback form so you could let us know how we did and how we could improve this for the years to come. Thank you very much again. And remember, March 5th is going to be session 2, the workshop where everybody's going to be able to have the chance to work on the budget, hands-on, and balance it. So we look forward to seeing you then. Take care, have a great evening, and drive safe.